the post-pandemic world order. And there's a lot to discuss there. But first, I would like to invite Mr. Yasuhide Nakayama, State Minister of Defense of Japan, to open the session all the way from Tokyo.
He is Japan's State Minister of Defense and has previously served as the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs. Please welcome our keynote speaker for this session, Yasuhide Nakayama.
So COVID-19 changed everything, everything. This is COVID-19. But please, I let you remind. 100 years ago, we had the Spain flu. This is United States, state of Kansas, military base, hospital at that time. This is Japanese student. They are waiting bus for school, for go to school. They are wearing masks. Even the baseball players wearing masks. And they're enjoying playing. First, China. It's a very big issue. This is a document that you can see. The green and red. Green is the Japanese self-defense force budget. The red, Chinese PLA military budget. 1988, 2015. Now, green the Japan budget, red is the Chinese budget. So they have a military budget 4 times bigger than Japan. If Chinese submarine launch missile from South China Sea, you can see lots of man-made islands around here, made by China. But they launch missile once. They can shoot down the White House on east coast of the United States soil. Means this whole area can covered by the Chinese missile. So I live in Japan. I'm very much worried about this missile. So using power, military power, to change the situation is not healthy. It's very, very unhealthy. Here is India. This is Japan. This is China, Russia. And this is free, open Indo-Pacific. Very important geopolitically, because all the package oil from Middle East through this region and coming up to Japan or to the Pacific Ocean. Free, open Indo-Pacific is very key point of peace and stable of world politics and world order. So how to hedge the risk of the war, World War III, is the theme of for the next generation. So today I would like you to think to hedge the risk of the war is to unite and make friends. I hope the world try to understand the situation, what's going on now. So thank you very much, and hope to see you soon next time in India with WION News. So thank you.
Has altered the very nature of global politics, and the country where the pandemic originated has been the key driver of this change, we can say. Life-saving vaccines are now a part of the great power competition the world over. Influence has changed direction. It is now shifting towards Asia. Our global engagements have changed in the past 1 year. While the pandemic opened opportunities for new alliances, it also heightened the sense of American exceptionalism and Chinese revisionism. And above it, it exposed a leadership vacuum. And that's what we will discuss In the next session, our focus is on the post-pandemic world order.
We all have to focus on generating domestic demand and driving sustainable global growth. And we're launching an ambitious new joint partnership that is going to boost vaccine manufacturing.
Multilateralism.
We've taken back control of our laws and our destiny.
Or protectionism. Equality and justice. Or xenophobic isolationism. Economic giants or emerging powers. Complementary policies or confrontational nationalism. What will dominate the post-pandemic world order? Joining us for this session, Ranil Wickremesinghe, former Prime Minister, Sri Lanka. Youssef Chahed, former Chief of Government of Tunisia. Regina IP Lau Suk-Yee, member of the Legislative Council of Hong Kong. Michael Tsai, former Defense Minister of Taiwan. Ahmed Nassim, Minister of Health of the Maldives. Moderating this session is Palki Sharma Upadhyay, Executive Editor of WION.
Mr. Wickremesinghe, how, according to you, has this pandemic changed the global pecking order?
Well, I think when we met in Dubai last year, none of us discussed what the post-pandemic global order will be. The pandemic was just starting. And I think we are not yet reached the stage where there is a medical solution. We are not even at the turning point. We are still at a pandemic stage. And we will have to stay there until they find a medical solution. In a way, this is the worst economic crisis after World War II. In World War II, European and East Asian economic capacity was destroyed. In this instance, it's not a question of destroying economic capacity or the financial system. It is that you can't have human contact, which is the basis of all economic activity. Since this pandemic cuts across the technology revolution, the social revolution, post-1989 unipolar world, which has now become a bipolar global order, the Washington Consensus Economics, climate change, and rise of Asia. These are these forces which have driven the rapid transformation of the world in the last 5 decades, will now have to see the impact that COVID has made on them. If US and the others have a lesser role to play, the new financial architecture will gradually make its way, not overnight, but it will be the start. But it has also brought out in the open the failure of the Washington-based economics, the leadership, global leadership. Now look at Trump's stand on COVID. It immobilized the whole US. European Union is still dominated by Brexit. And there's today a vaccine war that is taking place. The UN has been immobilized. There's open warfare in the WHO. But on the other hand, China and India have played a positive role, taking leadership not only in our region, but also helping Europe. Though US has had meetings on the COD on how to fight the pandemic, it has still not proved effective in our areas. All we see are Indians and the Chinese vaccines going along. So they have been more successful, and this is actually accelerating the power shift to Asia. Now the question is, while India wants to increase its profiles, it has to depend on accelerating its economic development. The outcome will depend on that, because India, unlike US, China and Japan, hasn't got the economic punch. So the pandemic, in a sense, is hastening the coming of a new global order.
That's a very interesting perspective. Youssef, Chahed, what is your understanding of the post-pandemic world order? Which countries or entities, according to you, are leading this or are set to lead this in the foreseeable future?
When confronted with death, people will look to who will save them. So the country or the force that will be recognized as having saved the world from the pandemic will gain power. I think recovery will depend on the crisis management and the quick containment of the virus. And here we can see that the response of Asian countries such as China, India, South Korea, Vietnam contrasted frankly with that of Europe and the Americas. The speed and the strength of the recovery will vary across regions, while we'll see China and India will continue to grow in 2021. Europe, Eurozone, and the Latin America will lag behind probably. The crisis, it is clear that there was no global, neither country played a global leadership role during the pandemic. This is clear. And I think it is unlikely that the new leadership will come from one country. The US, despite the political change, I think unilateralism will persist for a while due to internal economic issue and reconstruction, and probably US interest to the world will be smaller. And China will probably try to continue to promote its model, especially including how they contain the virus. But it will, and of course, China will try to establish leadership by filling the place left by the US, like when the United States withdraw from the WHO. But it must be tough, and I think it will be very challenging for China to provide it.
Too early to tell. What we can tell, though, is that in a crisis like this, in an ideal world, and this is a question for Regina IP Lau Suk-Yee, who is with us from Hong Kong, in an ideal world, superpowers or countries would see themselves in the role of a potential superpower, would come together, would help their own people and the people around them in other countries to overcome the crisis. But unfortunately, in this pandemic, we've also seen the rise of expansionism of a particular country, and Hong Kong has been at the receiving end of that more than most other regions in the world. Would you say the pandemic has just fast-tracked what was anyway happening? And do you believe that the past few months will serve as a wake-up call to the world on why they need to diversify supply chains, for instance? They need to find alternatives to countries that pursue aggression as a state policy.
COVID pandemic fully illustrates the political crisis, the lack of leadership, and the unwillingness to provide help to the international community exhibited by the developed countries, particularly US and Europe, the so-called leaders of the free world. And there are only about a dozen countries with the resources to produce vaccines, to develop the vaccines and to produce them. And the companies involved, whether it's AstraZeneca or Pfizer or whatever, they are all struggling to get production up to speed to meet demand. And the leaders of the free world, so-called, they are not helping the developing world by sharing their vaccines or sharing their technology. China has been providing the vaccines to Brazil, Turkey, a large number of countries free. And Russia is sharing the technology for producing Sputnik 5 with a number of countries, including Brazil, Turkey, So these countries, so-called authoritarian countries, are taking the lead, whereas the Western world is truly disappointing. And because of the lack of cooperation and the lack of leadership from these democratic countries, I think it will be a while before we can overcome this pandemic.
Michael Tsai, what are your thoughts on how the so-called global leaders and global institutions have responded to this once-in-a-lifetime crisis?
Yes, greeting from Taiwan. love from Taiwan as well. In response to your questions about the multilateral institution fail in this COVID-19, or you may call the Wuhan virus.
I beg your pardon. I don't think you should stigmatize this virus by calling it Wuhan.
All right.
I will depart. I will leave this platform if you use this term again.
Fortunately, Taiwan as a nation, it is the most lucky.
I am
nation
sorry, I have to leave this forum. Taiwan is not a nation. It is a renegade province of the People's Republic of China.
The whole point of this conversation is to have everyone put their points across, and I do request Ms. Lau Suk-Yee to be with us. Mr. Tsai, please make your point, sir. Go ahead.
And the second, talking about the global leadership, WHO, I think the WHO, the World Health Organization should take a major responsibility for lack of the global leadership in the beginning of the COVID-19. Therefore, I would suggest that in the future, WHO should have a collective leadership in the multilateral cooperation and consultation with the member of the WHO. Though Taiwan is not yet a member of WHO now, we are looking forward to have your support and your understanding why we need Taiwan as a nation to join WHO as well as the United Nations. And the second, talking about China, I think my fellow speaker previously talking about China. I think China has also taken responsibility why they did not report this kind of virus, the pandemic, to the WHO in time. They are delayed this kind of a public health problem to WHO. Therefore, I would suggest that WHO has to do a little bit more in kind of bilateral consultation cooperation instead of Secretary General of WHO and a few people make a decision for this kind of control of the disease and for the health problems. Talking about global leadership that China has to play, I appeal to the China has to respect the human rights and human dignity, because human rights and dignity is the universal social value. We have everyone in the world has to concern about the China's respect of human rights, particularly to the Hong Kong, to the Tibet, to the Xinjiang, or the Uyghurs people.
But I cannot end a session on the post-pandemic world order, Mr. Wickremesinghe, without mentioning what is happening in the Indo-Pacific, the Quad. How do you think, or what role do you think the Quad will play in shaping the power play in the post-pandemic world?
Well, as far as the Quad is concerned, firstly to begin with, what exactly is the Quad? Because President Trump wanted it to be an organization which is going to confront China and basically something like a mini NATO, while Prime Minister Modi's version of the Indo-Pacific was the inclusive, free and open Indo-Pacific. Now it was Japan who first started this, Prime Minister Abe, with the conflict of the two oceans. And again, he was looking at a free and open Indo-Pacific. Now, President Biden seems to have stepped back from former President Trump's position. So I think its role will be a sort of as was envisaged earlier, it will be, the Quad will mainly engage in security dialogue. And certainly the exercises they are doing now and the bilateral defense cooperation agreements. It won't become an alliance like NATO. But what's interesting is that the Quad is also now focusing on non-security matters like COVID-19. Now that's very interesting. But from what I see, the Quad has to still define its role, and they may be trying to balance China rather than confront China.
These are interesting times. I would have liked to engage more with you, and you've all given us a lot of food for thought.